A great honor. Thank you very much for giving us your time.
Thanks for having me on the show
To hear thoughts. We are in Ohrid during the Presma Forum for Dialogue, and a lot has been said about the Kosovo-Serbia relationship, and especially now that the dialogue should resume. We have a Washington agreement between the both parties, and it seems that Europeans kind of want to ignore that part. Have you got that feeling? Because these are the messages that they sent to Pristina, for instance.
No, not at all.
Okay.
You know, what we see is the European Union committed to supporting the dialogue process between Belgrade and Pristina, to facilitating that process. Miroslav Lajčák is leading that on behalf of the EEAS. We're partnered with the EEAS in that process. I'm a strong supporter of Miroslav Lajčák's role, of the dialogue process. Just 2 weeks ago, Mr. Lajčák and I traveled together from Pristina to Belgrade, met with the leadership in Pristina, met with the leadership in Belgrade. I think that was a very strong visual demonstration of transatlantic solidarity on this issue, and we are hopeful that the parties will come together in this process, identify points of commonality, and work together on a path forward towards
But aren't they
normalization.
identified in the Washington Agreement?
Well, the Washington Agreement, I think, offers some useful elements for normalizing the economic relationship between Belgrade and Pristina, but the broader normalization efforts is being spearheaded through the EEAS facilitated, the EU facilitated dialogue process that enjoys full U.S. support.
Is the DC agreement in any way, shape or form the basis for the continuing the talks between the both parties?
I think that there's a separate process, a separate understanding worked through the Brussels process, the Brussels dialogue.
So it's not then?
The Washington Agreement is something separate and apart from this.
Okay.
And I think that it is mutually reinforcing. I think there's elements of the Washington Agreement that are so strongly supportive of what it is that Lajčák and the EES team are doing. But the United States supports that EU facilitated process. We want to work with the parties, work with the European Union, work with member states in support of an agreement on the full normalization. of the relationship.
Can you tell us how close are your relationship and your views on Kosovo and Serbia with regard to the EU? Because sometimes we can't understand it properly, because EU 27 member states, we get that, then we have Mr. Lajčák, but we have the US which speaks all in one voice.
Well, I think that our vision for the future, which is the vision for the future that the countries of the Balkans really has for themselves, is a region that is fully integrated into the European system. That means membership in the European Union for all the countries of the Western Balkans, membership in NATO for all the countries that aspire to it.
Is there any timeline for that? Because we hear it all the time. Is there any timeline?
I mean, what we'd like to see is progress as quickly as possible towards that future. But the timeline is more than anything going to be controlled by the countries themselves and how quickly they can meet the criteria established by the European Union for membership. That said, I think it's very important that the EU make good on its commitments and unblock in particular the path forward for both North Macedonia and Albania as early as possible, ideally in the next couple of months.
Hopefully it will. As we see the role between Bulgaria and Macedonia, is there anything that can be dealt through compromises, or what can Macedonia do more compromises to get its seat, to get its proper place in the EU? Sir?
Sure. I mean, North Macedonia has
because
done
blockage
its
after
homework.
blockage.
North Macedonia has done everything that the EU has asked of it. They have earned the opening of accession negotiations. They've earned the first intergovernmental conference. And the European Union needs to find a way to make that possible, needs to find a way to open up that path, to launch the IGC. And it's our expectation that the EU will take this seriously and find that path forward.
2 weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, President Emmanuel Macron met Monsieur Zaev at the Elysee, and he said that the Prespa agreement should be taken as a model for other conflicts in the region, especially in the Balkans. Is that so? Do you see it that way? So are we coming up with new strategies because we have the Quint member states that you're part of, but do you all speak the same language? Do you have all the same aims nowadays?
Broadly speaking, yes. And I think when we look at PRESPA, for example, as a model for the region, first and foremost, I would argue what that means is the importance of leadership, the importance of political courage. So what I think we saw in the case of the PRESPA agreement is we saw
political courage.
A leadership in Skopje and a leadership in Athens that were ready to take risks, that were ready to take on difficult problems, that were ready to identify the essential compromises, make those compromises, and then defend them to their own people.
To their own people, right.
And that, I think, is something that is relevant as a model, certainly, for what you're seeing in the Serbia-Kosovo dynamic, relevant for what you're seeing in the internal conversations going on in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Leadership and leaders matter. They matter in the Balkans. They matter in every conflict situation.
But then you tell me, if you're expecting, do you expect that kind of a leadership from Serbia and from Kosovo?
Absolutely. And the point here would be what the two sides are being asked to do through this dialogue is not easy. They need to make compromises. They need
Can you tell us what they've been asked for?
Well, full normalization of the relationship, ideally in the view of the United States. Centered around mutual recognition.
Okay.
Our vision for the future is Serbia is a member of the European Union. Kosovo is a member of the European Union. How is it possible that you could have two member states of the European Union that don't recognize each other? So working towards that goal is the focus of the dialogue, to the full normalization of the relationship. That's going to be a step-by-step process, but it's one that will only be successful if the two sides demonstrate the necessary leadership.
But Serbia's status not also NATO stirred by the constitution.
Sure. That's
you
fine.
Expect Serbia to change that?
No, not at all. We would like Serbia to have the strongest possible partnership with NATO. And NATO and Serbia, frankly, have an excellent relationship, a close relationship, one that we value, one that we would hope to continue. But we have no concerns about Serbia's commitment to military neutrality. That's fine. And we would like just to have the strongest, closest partnership between NATO and Serbia that's possible.
Mm-hmm. What do you expect now from both from Vučić and Kurti to deliver in a forthcoming meeting?
Well, a path forward, right? And I don't want to predict what's going to come out of any one particular meeting.
That's really what interests. When you say path forward, what is it?
No.
What is it? That Mr. Kurti said we want to normalize, Mr. Vučić as well. That's a path forward too.
It's up to the parties themselves in this process facilitated by the EU to define the agenda, to define that path forward. And I don't want to prejudge that in any way. But I think there are certainly areas where the parties can come together with common interests, work through it, and identify areas of cooperation. Missing persons is just one area where I think there's
which they have been talking to since 2004, sir. Sure. They have been talking to under the EU ICRC auspices. They started 2003, 2004, and it never ended. We still have 2,000 some people missing.
Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that it isn't an area where they have sufficient commonality of interests, overlapping interests, that they can identify mechanisms by which they can strengthen and improve cooperation. We'd like to see that happen.
Are you expecting any game changers in the next talks between Kosovo and Serbia? And Bulgaria and Macedonia as well?
It's really up to the parties, right? What we'd like to do is to incentivize, to encourage the parties to identify the compromises that are necessary to really move this forward and to understand it as being in their interest to do so. I'm quite confident that a resolution between Sofia and Skopje over the issues that are currently blocking North Macedonia's progress towards membership in the European Union, I'm confident that those issues can be addressed and resolved. The EU needs to find a way to make good on its commitments to this country, to open up the path forward to Europe and to launch the IGC. That's an obligation that
you have to
the
deliver.
European Union has. They have undertaken that obligation freely. They need to make good on it.
During the summit, during the forum, I heard a lot that everyone is happy that the US has, after 4 years, is getting back to the region with its diplomacy. Is it so, sir?
I would challenge the idea that the United States ever left.
That's what you and I heard during the summit, sir, during the forum. We heard it both. It was
the United States has been here, engaged and active for my entire career in the U.S. Department of State, which stretches back to 1991. Wow. 1992. Through that whole period that I've been working and active on these issues, the United States has been present and committed to this region, to the partnership with the United States, and to the region's European perspective.
To go back to Kosovo, you mentioned that there needs to be, both sides need to come up with compromises. Is the land swap a compromise, or something that the U.S. administration will let it happen in the Balkans?
I don't think anybody's talking about that. I think it's a distraction.
By whom? For what cause? For what reason?
What's really important in the Balkans, I would argue, is governance. And what the countries of the Western Balkans need to do is that they need to focus in on ensuring good governance, transparency in governance, rule of law, accountability on the part of elected officials, meeting European standards. And that will help unblock and open up the path forward to Europe. So all this talk about maps and territory and non-papers, I think is a distraction.
By whom?
I wouldn't presume to know. But what I would do is encourage everybody to focus in on what really matters here. And what matters is ensuring a region that is at peace with itself, at peace with its neighbors, stable, prosperous, and firmly on the path to Europe.
In Kosovo's and Serbia's case, is it the association of municipalities that can be seen as the compromise?
Well, I think the way that Miroslav Lajčák and the EU team would put it is pacta sunt servanda, which is what is agreed should be implemented, right? There are existing agreements reached through the Brussels dialogue, reached through the EU facilitated process. Those agreements should be implemented, even as they work towards additional agreements that point to the path forward. And as long as everyone understands that what they're working towards is a normal relationship that unblocks the European path for both Serbia and Kosovo, I think there's room for compromise,
is that a yes?
accommodation, and progress.
For the Association of Municipalities, is that a yes?
That's
I don't want anyone else to interpret it, that's why I'm insisting on it. Is that a yes?
No, I understand what you're saying. The Association of Serb Municipalities is an obligation that Kosovo has undertaken.
Needs to deliver.
And it's one that it needs to deliver.
Even though the Constitutional Code found it that it may be, not maybe, but it is unconstitutional.
I think there are certainly mechanisms by which Kosovo could move forward on the association consistent with its constitutional obligations.
Okay, very interesting, very interesting. Is there anything else as for the compromises that need to be delivered from both sides?
Well, I don't want to
35 agreements, between the both parties, 35 agreements?
Yeah. There's certainly room to improve the quality of implementation on freedom of movement, for example.
Okay.
There's ongoing conversations about ID-only travel that are broader than the dialogue, that are part of the Regional Common Market Initiative, and that's something that would, I think, contribute to economic interchange and trade amongst the countries of the Western Balkans. That's a positive thing. It'll be good for the countries of the region to develop closer trade ties, closer economic ties, to really be able to build a common market of 18 million people that will be attractive to outside investors and that will create opportunities for growth, that will encourage folks from the Balkans to stay in the Balkans, raise their families here, make their lives here.
Okay. As for the lawsuit for the genocide that Kosovo talks about it so much, and it was an electoral promise as well by Prime Minister Kurti, what about it, sir?
Well, I don't think that kind of that approach is going to contribute to resolution of the disputes, of the friction points between Serbia and Kosovo. So what we'd like to see the parties, not just in the Serbia-Kosovo dispute, but really across the region do, is focus less on the past and more on the future. It's important for Kosovo's future that they identify points of commonality with Serbia, that they reach an agreement on a normal relationship and find a way to move this process forward. If Kosovo wants to pursue court cases, that is Kosovo's sovereign decision. What we would like to see them do is commit to the dialogue process and to a normal relationship with Serbia.
So you would definitely not advise them to pursue their lawsuit?
Well, the
or
first
you would?
Thing, they need to have standing.
Okay.
And so that's an issue that would need to be addressed before a suit could be filed. This stuff is complicated, and what we'd like to see is Kosovo and Serbia engage through the EU-facilitated dialogue in a process that is forward-looking and that creates opportunities for a more normal relationship.
But even in Macedonia, it opened a really big doubt that whatever you do with the EU, they won't deliver it at the end of the day. And they have a case now with the date and with ICG, sir.
No, I'm not going to defend the European Union.
That's good to hear.
The European Union has made a commitment to North
Yes,
Macedonia, to the launch of accession negotiations.
Yes,
It's
sir.
important that the European Union deliver on these commitments. I think it's important equally that the EU deliver on visa liberalization for Kosovo. That's a commitment that the EU has made. It's something that Kosovo has earned. And for the EU to reestablish the kind of credibility that will help them be effective across this region, they need to make good on these commitments.
And what if, in a highly hypothetical case, Kosovo and Macedonia, since we were talking about the both countries, decide to hold a referendum to become the 51st and the 52nd state of the United States of America, sir?
I mean, the United States,
I
we
mean,
have,
there
we
are
have
some
processes.
criteria that they need to meet, but still,
We have a constitutional process for bringing new
Yes.
states into the Union, and that is not it.
that is not
So-
it. That's not that simple, you mean?
Well, you know, Kosovo and North Macedonia, their vision for the future is as members of the European family of nations. That is their policy. It is a policy that the United States supports, one that we want to be partners in. And our vision for the future, and in fact the visions of Kosovo, North Macedonia, and other countries of the region for their own future, is as part of the European family of nations. That's really what the...
Does it mean that the US would not want them in?
I mean, that's just a hypothetical abstraction. What Kosovo and North Macedonia are
Need to
committed
do.
to is their European path. The United States shares that commitment. We share that vision. We share that goal.
Now, I'm asking because they understand much better with the USA than they do with the EU, and the US sticks to what it says rather than the EU prolongs it and prolongs it. With the dialogue, we never know when it will end between Kosovo and Serbia. The dialogue that Mr. Cooper started, we never know when it will end.
Well, it ends with success, right? And
It should.
It should. And the goal is to encourage the parties to identify the compromises that are necessary and required to reach an agreement on full normalization. Defining full normalization is part of the dialogue process. I don't want to prejudge that process. For us, the goal ought to be mutual recognition.
Mr. Palmer, thank you very much for your time, sir.
My
I
pleasure.
really, really appreciate it. Thank
My
you very
pleasure.
much.
Thank you. Thank you for
Schon
the
van
opportunity.
dit.